A warm welcome back. You're watching Today here on eNCA. If you have just joined us, it's 13 before 4. We are in the first hour. Lots to get through inside this hour. Turkish power producing company Karpowership is willing to cut a contract to supply power to South Africa down to 5 years. That's from the 20 years originally proposed. In fact, if you remember, Karpowership generates power on floating gas ships offshore. Now, to discuss the impact of such a deal, I'm joined by political economist Patrick Bond. He's with the University of Johannesburg Centre for Social Change. Patrick, good afternoon. Thank you so much for making the time. Let's talk about the timeline of 20 years, which was initially put on the table, cut down to now 5. Economically, how huge is that impact and that difference? What does that mean for us holistically?
Well, it was a very expensive contract, Will, if you recall, that 218 billion rand, and that would not even buy you the ship. Likewise, if we move it just down to 5 years, it's very expensive per year, and we don't own the ships afterwards. These are ships that are fed by liquefied natural gas from a second ship, and they are meant to take up quite a bit of space in the Richards Bay, the Kucha next to Gqeberha, the harbor there, and Saldanha on the west coast. And the deal apparently is 15 billion rand a year, so that's 75 billion. It's an enormous amount, especially when we consider it's only about 1,220 megawatts. So, you know, the entire grid at the moment probably today is going to be using about 30,000. So we're only adding, well, about 3%. But the danger of going from coal, as that winds down due to the climate crisis, and these stations are old, the danger of going from coal to gas is enormous because of the additional climate implications, because gas is 85 times more potent a greenhouse gas, the methane that will be going in, than is coal. So there are a lot of, let's say, hidden costs that might hit the economy later if we're hit, as we are inevitably going to be, with climate sanctions, because we have just too much energy into our export products that comes from the greenhouse gas production, whether coal or now more methane gas.
And obviously, Patrick, I mean, when you look at the debt that Eskom still sits on in some of the municipalities, this will be a welcome solution, but not at the cost of 75 billion rand over 5 years, yes?
That's right. And because the currency's been declining, and if we are maintaining, unfortunately, Eskom did a great deal of foreign debt, of loans that the World Bank and the African Development Bank, the China Development Bank gave, that escalate because our currency declines. We have to pay higher amounts of rands for the same dollar loan repayment. So the effective interest rate is very high. You're very correct about that. And the dilemma is that we could be funding with many more locally generated renewable resources and energy storage, exactly that same amount. And we wouldn't have that much of an impact on, let's say, the geographical location. It's a big concern. The transmission grid is not strong enough right now to take in all the renewables. But, you know, it's a bit of a tragedy that these Karpowerships reserved a fair bit of the transmission grid and they haven't been used. Also of concern, by going to a different kind of time frame, they also will have to do the environmental impact assessment. And you will recall the marine ecologists and local fisher folk successfully prevented them in places like Saldanha and Richards Bay from going ahead because of the huge implications of, imagine a massive big power station right in your harbor. So it changes everything for local ecology and marine biology to the fishing situation.
And let's talk about that a bit, Patrick. I mean, when we talk about just the environment in South Africa, obviously this would come at an even higher cost for the carbon emissions and the like.
Yes, that's right. The critical thing that our Environment Ministry, ironically, isn't yet doing is factoring in a proper cost of greenhouse gases to the world, because now we're in a stage everyone must recognize after the hottest weather in world history last month. And that in turn causes the kind of crises we witnessed just about a year and 4 or 5 months ago. If you remember the rain bombs that hit Durban, killed 500 people. Those are priceless, but there was also about 40 billion rand of damage. Now, the kind of damage that we do with a ton of carbon that we emit in South Africa, and now, as I say, with methane being so much more potent, that cost is not yet reflected because we have a carbon tax that's very small. In US dollar terms, it's about 31 cents, whereas Sweden charges $132 per ton for its industries, its mines, its the sort of high carbon intensity parts of the economy. And that's why I make the point that those who want the Karpowership are probably sabotaging all the rest of the economy, because as we get more and more of this greenhouse gas emissions, when we're supposed to be decarbonizing, now replacing methane for the coal, the impact for sanctions for a carbon border adjustment mechanism hits. So in other words, Europe says with a CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the climate sanctions, that since we have a high greenhouse gas component, we will then have to have a tariff put on us so that it's a fair playing field. And let me add one more ecological and social crisis. Our methane coming into the Karpowerships would come from Cabo Delgado, Mozambique, the closest place we're seeing large amounts about to be extracted. And if we do get that methane, it's what we would call blood methane. Unfortunately, we have 1,200 troops from the SANDF defending Total Energies and ExxonMobil, China National Petroleum, the Italian firm ENI. And I think that's a really untenable situation. And then you add that to the charges of corruption. Andre de Ruyter, the outgoing Eskom CEO, said in his interview that Karpowerships worried him. When he was trying to get massive amounts of new energy, he would have liked them. But he said, quote, if you do a fairly perfunctory search on Karpowership, it is quite clear there's an extensive legacy of alleged corruption, breaches of contract, and abuse that they've left in their lurch in the countries they've operated. And that includes several in Africa. So those are a whole set of reasons that we hope that maybe there's a rethink that could be possible and a move towards renewables more rapidly, and maybe some conservation, some demand management.
Yeah, renewables sooner rather than later. Patrick Bond, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Obviously, this would mean it's a political time bomb, right, that we are sitting on. But so we'll have to keep our eyes very close on that and see how things unfold in real time here in South Africa.